Hey, I'm ElleJanelle. I would like to welcome you to a special launch of my new show, Ellaborate. On this show, our goal is to try to outline an argument in a way that allows for us to have better communications about the parts that we agree and disagree with. So today I picked a particular topic that's very important to the Black community, which is very near and dear to my heart. And we're going to kind of flush out both sides of the argument and some background information about why the argument even presents itself. And we're going to label some of the claims in the argument. And what I want you to do is use those labels to identify which claims you agree and don't agree with, to help share a little bit about the way we are convinced of what is true and what's not true. So really, let's get down to what the actual question is. The question is whether or not funds from corporate settlements and funds from capitalist philanthropists are a help or a hindrance to movement work. We're going to investigate both sides of this argument and kind of flesh out which one is steeped in reality a little better. This is one of many shows that will be premiering on my new channel, Entertaining Elements. This channel is focused on philosophy, specifically urban philosophy, as well as the theory of knowledge and how we come to believe what we believe. So, before we put the cart in front of the horse, let's just get into it. Welcome to Ellaborate with ElleJanelle. Now, we're going to start this off with a couple of videos about the Target boycott. This was known as a very effective and historic boycott that was called on Target when they decided to roll back some of its DEI programs after Donald Trump and the Confederates decided that all of a sudden DEI was racist. So let's get into the two videos first, and then I'll kind of tell you a little bit more about what we're going to do this episode.
God be the glory for the great things that he has done. I am appreciative of the abiding presence of the Holy Spirit that has covered us. I'm grateful that the hand of God protected our brothers and sisters every Saturday without incident or accident. I'm praying. I don't want it to be said that it was because of tariffs. It was done because Black people and brown people and conscientious people had a made-up mind that we can make a difference and we can make an impact. And so could things be different? Yes, but things are better. And I'm appreciative. And sometimes we've got to celebrate small steps. Nelson Mandela, in his autobiography, The Long Walk to Freedom, said that the long walk to freedom begins with the first step. And I believe, ladies and gentlemen, history will record this was the first step to the new civil rights movement. And so I am grateful for those who walked alongside us, those who partnered with us, and I am thankful that we can claim in this hour that victory is ours. Would you do me a favor for the nameless and faceless people who are not in the room? Would you give them an applause, please? Yes, thank you. I'm gonna have you do it. Yes, I'm gonna have Nina wants to say something. But the Target Fast entity of the boycott is, and I speak for the Target Fast, this is an amalgamation of several different movements that are taking place, but the Target Fast entity, which is the faith-based initiative, is claiming victory and giving God glory for what it is that we have done. We are effectively today closing this chapter because we have other fights that we've got to see and other things that we've got to tackle, but I'm grateful and I give God all of the glory for what it is that he's been able to do. So thank you for praying with us, marching with us, and standing with us, and stay tuned for the next fight. But this fight for us has now reached its conclusion.
Thank you.
Okay, so that was Jamal Bryant and Senator Nina Turner. And now let's check out this one that has a slightly different response.
The fact that through our efforts, we were able to help oust the previous CEO of Target, resulting in him having to take a significant multi-million-dollar pay cut, and that was Brian Cornell, who, as the CEO, decided to bypass the local leadership of the Target boycott. And who did he go to? Reverend Al Sharpton, who had absolutely nothing to do with the Target boycott. And they met, along with so-called pastor from Atlanta, Jamal Bryant, to try to end the Target boycott. Now, we had a conversation with Reverend Al Sharpton recently where he actually apologized to the three of us for even getting involved in conversations with Target because he had nothing to do with it. And so the fact that we helped oust Brian Cornell, now he's in a board chair position, which in reality, he should be nowhere near Target Corporation because his leadership is part of the reason that we got here. But Target decided to hire from within, which is another problem. They hired Michael Fidelki. Michael Fidelki has been with Target for a very long time. Michael Fidelki knows the leaders in this community. Yet, once again, he chose to bypass local leadership who actually launched the Target boycott to meet with a pastor from Atlanta who has zero credibility, who has lied, who has tried to co-opt our boycott, who started a 40-day fast over a month after we launched the Target boycott. That 40 days came and went. And what did he do? He hired a publicist. He went to the Roland Martin show. He went to the Breakfast Club. And he went to CNN pretending to be the leader of the nationwide Target boycott. We called him out then, and we're calling him out now. But the reality is that Target knew he wasn't the leader of the boycott, but they knew that he could be bought and sold. They knew that he would agree to end the Target boycott without any of the demands being met. He's claiming that 75% of the demands are met. But first of all, the main demand, the reason we launched the Target boycott, has not been met, which is the fact that we asked Target to reverse its decision to roll back diversity, equity, and inclusion. That has not happened. So this Target boycott is not over. We are asking people continue to stand with grassroots leadership in the state of Minnesota, where Target is actually headquartered, and not cloud chasers, not fake pastors, not fake activists trying to co-opt our work. These people have received awards from the National Association of the NAACP and the Route 100 for our work. So they have no credibility. They don't speak for us. They didn't stand in the gaps for us when George Floyd was killed or when Operation Metro Surge happened. We stood for us and with the community. We speak for us. And we will never sell out our community for crumbs or a seat at Target's corrupt table. So we are asking people, continue to double down and hold Target accountable. The boycott continues. Thank you.
Okay. So you see, we just watched two completely different videos, two completely different responses to Pastor Jamal Bryant's announcement that his Target fast was coming to an end. Jamal Bryant seemed very okay with getting 3 out of 4 of his requests. But as you see, local leadership in Minnesota did not kind of take it the same way. I mean, on one hand, it's seen as a historic victory and one of the most effective boycotts in generations, but we also have another group calling it a betrayal. They both seem to be pretty certain of their version of reality. I started thinking about, how could I pull this off? How could I communicate these two opposite sides of this argument about whether or not corporate settlements and philanthropy from capitalists and activists getting involved in order to facilitate these corporate settlements is a hindrance or helpful to movement work? I mean, on one hand, Pastor Jamal Bryant did secure a lot of resources for whichever nonprofits actually got the money from Target. But on the other hand, local leadership is saying, we didn't ask for money. We asked for you to roll back your significant changes to your DEI program. So this is how I decided to do it. We are going to outline both sides of this argument and code different claims. If you find a claim that you disagree with, use that coded label in order to say, hey, this is where I disagree. And so that's why I kind of go the opposite way. Or maybe you can say, I actually swerve in between both of these arguments and I came to a completely different conclusion for whatever reason. But that really is what this experiment is. It's a way to figure out how we can better communicate with each other about the way we actually see these different decisions in the Black community. And I'm hoping that it can facilitate better conversations, deeper conversations, instead of sometimes just tussling over surface level canned responses that kind of, to me, make the conversation a little flat, and it leaves the parts that are kind of confusing still confusing. So let's start actually with a couple of what I would call common ground claims. The way that I looked at this is, first, let's kind of test the waters to figure out if we at least have the same, room temperature. So I fleshed out what I think is 4 common ground claims that we all can kind of agree on. And I want you guys to know that I'm kind of outlining these two sides of the argument with the assumption that we all agree on these common ground claims. Now, if you find one of the common ground claims to be where you disagree, I would imagine the rest of this will fall apart. But I still want to hear about it just so we can kind of chart where people fall. Okay, common ground claim number 1. Black communities are deprived of resources by design. These resources are taken from us through policy changes, and those policy changes are enacted with money. having us deprived of those resources become very profitable for different entities, organizations, corporations, and therefore they invest their money in lobbyists, writing bills and different ways in order to enact policies that will keep these terrible circumstances in play. We saw this with redlining. We saw this with the way the mortgage market refused to give mortgages to certain Black people, especially in Chicago. A lot of the Black home purchases around that time, they had to be with like a contract. It was like installment contracts. And with those installment contracts, they were very like strict contracts where like you miss one payment and it'll be total forfeiture of your entire house or whatever. And research later estimated that those type of contracts actually extracted like billions of dollars from Black Chicago alone. So that's just an example of certain policies that like find a way to steal, to kind of inflict somewhat of a Black tax. And it's written on the books, so it's really hard to get around. I mean, even things like urban renewal, where they put an interstate through your city. That's another example of us not really having a say at the table when these policies are created that end up putting us in a financial burden or our bodies in terrible situations. For instance, when you talk about private prisons and different policies that are enacted to get more people to go to prison so that it can become profitable for the shareholders, a lot of times we bear the brunt of that with our men getting arrested more and getting arrested for longer. I mean, you can even think back to vagrancy laws where they just made up a policy where, shit, if I just sit down and lay down for a second, you can take me and put me in jail and then put me to work through convict leasing. So that's an example of certain type of policies that are enacted through money and through infrastructure that end up taking resources away from us, be it money or be it our bodies themselves. We also have some examples with like the city of Ferguson when they found out that they were actually financing itself through citations that like overwhelmingly targeted Black people. Small things like that sometimes go unnoticed, uncounted, or unbroadcast by our media for us to kind of have our eye on the ball where we're able to even organize around these type of policy decisions that end up robbing us. So this is why the first common ground claim is that Black people are specifically targeted in this country in order to be robbed and deprived of resources. Let's go to the second claim. The second claim is that people doing the depriving hold infrastructure, and that infrastructure is actually bipartisan. So that process that I described about how lobbyists can fight for policy that end up negatively affecting us or write bills that they end up getting their already bought and paid for politicians to enact, that is a really deep infrastructure. So not only do we need the money, but we also kind of need the modern network of like business lobbies, litigation shops, model bill mills, maybe it's possible that in order to enact the type of change that we need, we maybe won't be using the same processes. And I think that's very fair to consider. But if we're looking at it as though we want to have similar power, it will probably require a certain level of money and it will probably require a certain level of infrastructure. Let's go to the common ground claim number 3. Common ground claim number 3, C3. Movement work, including organizing, litigating, and community programs, have always required funding. Now, this is kind of a touchy one for me because just because it requires funding doesn't necessarily mean it requires corporate funding, settlement funding, funding from philanthropists that actually are the capitalists that sometimes are exploitative to our very community. So I want to be clear that I'm saying that we should reach common ground on the fact that we need funding, but not necessarily common ground on where that funding should come from. As you know, historically, things like the Montgomery bus boycott require funding. I mean, we had to put gas in the car. We had to insure the car. We had to repair some of these cars as we attempted to not utilize the bus services. But a lot of that was community funded, where people put their own money together and found a way to make things work. So I think it's important that we all kind of agree that yes, maybe we could do it with no money at all, but it would definitely be a much more difficult process, and having some monetary benefits actually put us in a better position where maybe we can kind of get a little further for our next fight. Like even when you think about landmark cases that we fought, a lot of that was paid for with legal defense funds, things of that nature. So that is common ground number 3. Organizers need money and organizers need resources. Now let's move to common ground claim number 4. Movement funding sources vary. It could be the community itself, it could be philanthropy, it could be corporate money through pledges, or it could be settlement. This money comes through a fixed set of doors, and each door has kind of its own history. We already talked about the community's funding with its own mutual aid societies, burial societies, church funds. All of these predate Black access to banks. So we want to be clear that there is a way for us to fund it ourselves, but there are other kind of historically known funding mechanisms. Philanthropy is another example. Things like the Garland Fund, where a young white heir basically gave their inheritance away to like the NAACP and things of that nature. We also have settlement, the settlement door, the settlement option, where a corporation does something it's not supposed to do and it's sued. And the money that comes from those settlements or things like that oftentimes get trickled back into nonprofit agencies or nonprofit programs, and they go to do the work. So hopefully we've kind of gotten down to like an agreement on these common ground issues. If any of these 4 issues ring to you as false, I want you to get into the comments or message me, DM me, react to this, make a reel something, and kind of tell me why is this common ground claim false? Because my understanding is that these should kind of be agreed upon. Movements need money. The money comes from these common sources. The people who fighting against us definitely have money, and they definitely have infrastructure. So now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's try to work our way into the actual question of the day. Is this type of corporate activism helpful or a hindrance? Now, before we can get immediately into that question, I started to kind of argue with myself about another question that seems to kind of be the undergird of this question in the first place. So actually, we're going to do 2. I'm going to show you 2 sides of an age-old question that's really more so about whether or not the money is needed in the first place. I talked about it a little bit already, but let's really use this as a testing ground to really flush out whether or not this is actually true. So let's start with our first question. Our first question is really about, does success in the US capitalistic system kind of disqualify you from participating, funding, or leading the fight against it? We may need money, but does that source of that money affect the value of it? And notice I added 3 different verbs: participating, funding, leading. All 3 of them may actually have different answers, but let's kind of go through the different positions of this debate so we can kind of see where we fall. Now, we have 2 different chains. One, we have the refusal chain, who feels like, yes, you making that level of money disqualifies you from participating. We also have another chain, which is kind of the force multiplier chain. And they kind of feel like, no, it doesn't disqualify you from participating, funding, leading. If anything, it takes the force of you having monetary power and it multiplies it. It actually makes us, it puts us in a better position. Let's listen to the refusal chain and let me know which part of the argument you fall on. So let's investigate this refusal chain. The first claim is that capitalism structurally requires paying labor less than its value, which requires a level of exploitation. And in America, it super exploits Black workers specifically. I mean, we have the structural part that just talks about how labor is the largest cost and you get a profit by selling something for more than the cost. So there's a baked in incentive to pay workers less so that you can make more money. Let's get into the second claim. A person's political interest basically follows their material possession. So if your politics track where your security lives, there's a little bit of a shakiness to whether or not we can actually trust you to be mindful of the movement when the movement itself could be disenfranchising you. Okay, and now when we get to R3, donor money tends to steer movements, and organizations reshape themselves in order to get that money. So because of that steering, a lot of people are weary of taking money from certain places. R4 is that the wealthy, including the Black wealthy, should be excluded from funding or leading movement work. This is actually a conclusion built on the other 3 claims. If capitalism requires exploitation, and people's political interest follows their material possession, and donor money steers movements, how can we really trust a corporate settlement or a capitalist philanthropist to give funds without basically steering the movement away from destabilizing the very thing that puts food on their plate? So that's the refusal chain. Those are people who believe, we're good on the money because it'll break our movement anyway, so it's really pointless. But then we have the opposite side, who is the force multiplier chain. They think a little differently. Let's start with M1, the first claim. They believe that no one can reasonably be required to opt out of an economy that surrounds them. So from their point of view, with this claim, they're basically saying, hey, the world, and America specifically, is steeped in capitalism. How can we ethically expect a person not to operate in a capitalistic manner, especially a Black person? So the question is, do you even have the option of opting out? And so there really is a flaw in this argument to me, because although you may not be able to opt out, that doesn't mean you have to necessarily hoard wealth. And so I worry about that one. Let's get into F2. F2 talks about wealth being held by Black individuals as capacity under Black control. And they speak to it as if it's automatically a positive. We need capacity, we need power, and it being under Black control is a good thing. Now, these are what the people who are against this argument say. They say that aggregate is a bit of an illusion because, even when you talk about the $1 trillion buying power of the Black community, a lot of times it's consumption more than it is like assets that are being held. Second, we talk about the scale. Like every Black owned bank in the country combined really only holds like a few $1 billion in assets. And so they also talk about the third issue of expiration. A lot of times we build these Black conglomerates and people sell out. They decide that, hey, we built Motown, we're going to sell it to MCA. We built BT, we're going to sell it to Viacom, and plenty of businesses after those. So to look at it like, oh, we're building wealth and it's building capacity, and that capacity ends up getting handed over, that could kind of be a weakening of this claim. The last complaint about this claim is about conduct. Okay, we're building up this capacity, but what do the owners do with this capacity? If they started to ingratiate themselves in the ways of capitalism and exploitation, we should probably assume that they're going to continue to be exploitative in themselves. So we're gaining a capacity, but a capacity to do what? A capacity to participate in the same exploitation? A lot of people don't see that really as a win. And so they push back on M2. But let me know in the comments what you think. Wealth is capacity, and capacity under Black control is good. You agree or do you disagree? Anyway, let's continue moving forward. So the next claim in the force multiplier is that refusing Black wealthy funders while the corporate opposition deploys its own wealthy class is, in a way, unilateral disarmament. Basically, this claim is saying that we are fighting against a 8-handed monster making it rain in the club. Us saying, hey, we know that you guys have a bunch of money and you're using it to lobby against us and make bills and make all of these policies against us, but we're not going to use money. We're going to add a qualifier to it. We're going to do it broke. Could be seen as flawed logic. And that's really what this claim is stating. They're saying, why would we try to fight them with our hands tied behind our back? We're disarming ourselves by deciding to throw out the baby with the bathwater. We are forced to participate in capitalism. When a person becomes successful enough to garner enough money, we should utilize that money as a force multiplier in order to get the things that we need. A lot of times people who agree with this claim, they talk about how the Black community doesn't really have that much money in the first place. So I think they say we make around 40,000. I think we're like 40,000 to 250,000. It's like kind of our range, our most common range. And so the argument is, hey, maybe we need to let the people with the money in because, hey, we need that. And a lot of people push back and say, no, we can just do it on our own. To which some people say, yeah, that small dollar amount is cool, but sometimes it takes a significant event in order to bring in more money. Sometimes those self-funded movements can be great movements, but die out because of a lack of a multiplier. The argument is basically, don't tie your hands behind your back. So from there, the people who believe in all of these claims on the force multiplier chain, they oftentimes comes to the conclusion that we have coming up next as the fourth claim. Basically, they're saying Black entrepreneurs should not only be included, but deliberately grown into force multipliers for movement work. Now, I can already hear y'all screaming out about this one because there are some problems with this. Like, for instance, how do I make sure that we build up these force multipliers and they actually have the same loyalty that we expect them to have? I mean, who's to stop us from building somebody up to be a millionaire, billionaire, and then they decide, hey, I'm out of here. I'm just going to go live on my yacht and I don't have anything to do with what it is that the movement wants because now I feel free and I feel separated from those causes. So proponents of this oftentimes say either it's kind of a principal agent problem that without a contract, one could just be investing for no reason. Also, some people who disagree with this outlook feel like sometimes the lines can get a little blurry where the person becoming successful gets presented as if that is the success itself. Almost like the celebrant takes over the idea around what it means to have Black success. The existence of the Black billionaire becomes the success because our goal was to build up somebody of this nature. And the fact that they have been built up to this point, I guess we are successful. So that's why we have these two different sides that sometimes can be very much tumultuous. They kind of have this tussling that goes back and forth. So when you look at these two lines of thinking, you kind of understand how we had those two varying responses at the beginning of this video. You have one side that feels like, no, we have our demands, and until we get that particular thing done, there is no winning. And another side who feels like we've been able to acquire resources from these corporations and we're going to distribute these resources amongst our organizations, and that is a win. That is a victory. And so I would like for you to kind of go down these two lines of thinking and kind of let me know, which side do you lean? Do you lean to the refusal side, or do you lean to the force multiplier side? This is an age-old argument that we have been having in the Black community for some time. Just for this video, I'm going to lean towards the force multiplier side because I want to really get into the argument around whether or not the corporate settlements and the capitalist philanthropists are actually helpful. And so we would have to lean towards the force multiplier side to even get to that arm of the argument. So I'm not saying that I completely agree. I think I can totally see the logic behind refusing because it does kind of seem counterproductive to have a person that is benefiting from exploitation in any way, shape, or form present themselves as they're coming to save us from exploitation. But just for the fun of this episode, let's keep it going and get into the next arm if we were to go with the force multiplier. Let's keep it going. And by the way, this is Entertaining Elements channel where we really study urban philosophy and theory of knowledge. And we try to figure out why people believe what they believe and in what ways can we make sure that we are more in what ways we can figure out how we are more attuned with reality and not believing things that are actually fantasies. So it's your girl ElleJanelle, and thank you for hanging out with us as we elaborate. So I started thinking more about what would make the refusal side be so adamant about it. What is the characteristic that they're trying to avoid? I think really it comes down to an assumed conflict of interest. There is, to me, a reasonable assumption that a person's duty to their own interest may pull them towards wanting policies and creating ways for them to still benefit. So let's get into a couple ways to kind of identify whether or not there is a conflict of interest and at what point does that conflict of interest even start? I mean, we see a lot of times people seem to target the spectacle. They go immediately to billionaires. If you're a billionaire, you definitely cannot have our best interests at heart. So we automatically reject you. But I somewhat reject that claim. And I reject that claim in a way that you would be surprised. I bet you're thinking, oh shit, is she about to take up for billionaires? Actually, I think I'm more radically to the opposite side. I think the way that people feel about billionaires should be stretched off to a much wider audience. So I started thinking to myself, how could I really set the line to where that conflict of interest starts? I mean, benefiting from exploitation of other people's labor, I don't think you have to cross $1 billion to make it to that class of people. So I started asking myself, what do you think is the number? And so another arbitrary number kind of popped up and I started saying, maybe like 50 million. If you have assets worth 50 million, then to me, you register the same as a billionaire. You are very well ingratiated into the system of profiting from other people's labor, and you probably benefit from policies that negatively affect the Black community as well as other communities all around the country. So then I started saying, well, where did you get 50 million from? I can't make a complaint that people are just looking at the spectacle. That's why they pick billionaires. And then I just randomly picked $50 million. Like, what was that based off of? So what I did was I tried to come up with some different ways to identify where the line is to kind of trigger that conflict of interest. And I found 4 different ways to do it. Let's get into it. So what would be the conflict of interest criteria? So we have one version. It's called the could line. Maybe we look at it like how much money do you have when everybody in your household can just stop working? And I looked into some surveys. It's a BLS consumer expenditure survey. And basically the number that they came up with was around 2.5 to 3 million in working assets, kind of gives you a sustainable place to withdraw from the labor market. So I said, damn, I said 50 million, but it actually might be closer to 3 million. And then we start to get into the second criteria, which is the do criteria, where we basically ask, at what wealth do households actually earn more from capital than from paychecks? Because you can use the could method, but just because you can do something doesn't mean you actually do it. So I worry a little bit about putting the number at a place where just because you can, we assume that you are. So the do line actually puts it at around like 11 million and up. And then basically once you cross over into the 1%. So I did start to see a little bit more on why people are talking about the 1%. Because remember I said, are we just attacking billionaires because of the spectacle? But it's funny that they said it's usually when you cross over to the 1%, and the 1% was around like 11 million. And so I said, well, maybe it's just being in the 1%. Once you get to the top 1%, then that's what you are. So that's the rank line. That it actually is closer to like 11.6 million in household wealth. And so it measures rank, but not really function, because you could be in the 1% and not participate in this. But it feels like once you cross over to that top 1%, you're more than likely, at least you have a conflict of interest. I mean, it'd be hard to say that the way that you maintain your wealth in your family is through exploiting the labor of others, and you made it to the 1%, but you actually want to help us stop being exploited because you don't want to get more money. You would rather help us. It definitely creates a conflict of interest. Now, the last option is the donor line, where basically we look at what wealth do you start to give money or start to try to move policy. That number was slightly higher, and it was based on a Page, Bartels, and C. Wright 2013 study where they kind of looked at who are the people who are donating to these campaigns. It was around 14 million in average wealth, and it was the top 10th of the 1% of donors. And it was 40% of all campaign money. So we still see the campaign finance research documenting a donor class that extends far below $1 billion. So even though that number is a little higher, it still doesn't really rescue the billionaire only criteria. You know, this actually is like functional, empirical, positional, and political data that rejects the idea that it's only billionaires. It's billionaires and half billionaires. It's billionaires and 100 millionaires. It's billionaires and 20 millionaires. Like the studies show, 14 million in assets kind of identifies you as the people who are donating up to 40% of the campaign finances for most of our politicians. So to me, I was like, okay, well, maybe we found the line. But then not so quick, because although this may be the line based on the data, one has to kind of ask yourself, well, is that the same for Black people? I don't think so. So let's look at some of the Black adjustments here. Now, the general population numbers probably don't transfer to Black households because, you know, we have differences such as composition. So even at equal net worth, Black households end up holding less in income producing assets and more in like the primary residence. But then when you start looking at their returns, even things like their primary residence don't seem to have the same level of returns to it. Then you have to kind of consider the network. Like there's fewer than half of Black households report being able to raise $3,000 or so from a family. So how does your money move differently when you're the only one with money? Also, we have a lack of inheritance. A lot of other people in the top 1%, they may have gotten a lot of it from inheritance. So a lot of times you become the only person in the family that big portions of the family rely on. So even when we accumulate a certain amount of wealth, I don't think that the Black dollar stretches as far because of all of these separate issues that actually puts the wealthy Black member of the family or the community in a position to not benefit as much from this wildly exploitative system that they've been raking us over the coals with for centuries. So if you kind of run the adjustments, I would think that a Black person's number falls a little bit higher. I wouldn't take it all the way to the 11.6 because I don't think that we can only look at it as the people who are actually donating to the campaigns as the number. I think your interests start to shift closer to when your income source shifts. When your income source is labor-based, your labor, wage-based, where you have to go out there and perform the labor in order to make the income, I put you a little bit more on the opposite side. When you get to the point where your assets are making enough money for you to live on, that is where I think the conflict of interest presents itself. And that number is much lower than one would think. I would think that number is closer to $2 to $3 million, as we stated in the first criteria option. But for a Black member of the community, I think I actually want to push that up to closer to $5-6 million. So to me, and I know this is an aside, and let me know if you disagree, I think that conflict of interest starts around $4 or $5 million in assets. Let me know what you think. So that starts to make the argument really unique because it makes me want to ask the people who lean towards refusal, the people who say, hey, if you got money, you can't really participate. I wonder, do they feel the same way at 5 million? I know they feel that way about 100 million. But if we say, hey, if you're looking at it that way, then the people who actually become people with conflicts of interest towards the movement, they register at a much lower number than one would expect. Does that mean you also want to exclude people at $5 million of assets? We don't want their help. We don't want their donations. We don't want them joining the movement. We don't want them taking a stance. We don't want them starting movements. I think that starts to make that argument a bit harder to stand on because it feels like throwing out the baby with the bathwater. I'm sure the Black person that's worth $5 million definitely are not looking at themselves as being so good where they no longer have this stake in movement work. Actually, I think what happens is they start to develop somewhat of a dual bias. Because on one hand, you have interest in this capitalistic system because it's how you're attaining resources. But on the other hand, I'm pretty sure there's still some exclusionary practices going on in that system for Black people. We see how often rich Black people have their resources stripped away from them. We see how often rich Black people attempt to make some sort of investment or take some risks that other entrepreneurs have taken before them and they're blocked out. So I think that there's like this dual bias or this conflicting interest kind of situation that's going on where it's like, hey, I know I'm rich and I know that I feel like I benefit from the labor of other people, but I don't really benefit that much because every time I try to benefit, they find another way to be racist towards me. So I just find this to be absolutely fascinating. Let me know where you fall on this. Is this completely like, oh no, ElleJanelle, you're just coming up with an excuse for the capitalists, down with all of the capitalists, it doesn't matter, we don't feel bad for them, they don't feel any way? Or do you feel like, that's a good point. At what point are we saying that the capitalists have reached the point of no return? Or do you feel like that's completely unfair? A person making $5 million is nowhere near close to the predator of a billionaire. Being able to even garner that much wealth kind of speaks to how much of a exploitative person you have to be in the first place. Do you feel like there's a huge difference between the person who's accumulated 5 million and the person who accumulated $1 billion? And even though there is a difference, do you think that materially alters that conflict that we're discussing when we're talking about whether or not their money, their leadership, or their participation is a conflict of interest in movement work? Let me know in the comments. Let me know on Twitter where all of the raging racist Confederate fuckers are. No, I'm just playing. Let me know in the comments. Make a reel and respond. Let me know in the comments what you think. This is going to be fascinating. I hope to have a great conversation with you about it. And for the record, I don't know which one I think. I'm going to try to figure it out, but I'm not exactly sure. I really see merit on many sides of the situation. And I think that's why I'm so interested to lay this out so that I can hear from the people, from scholars, from philanthropists themselves, from activists themselves. I'm really interested in a very robust conversation where we can really identify where we agree, where we disagree, where do we have evidence, where do we have speculation, where does rhetoric kind of take over and we don't really get to examine the true merits of people's position. So I'm really looking forward to all of your comments, and I'm really appreciating you guys rocking with me on this episode of Elaborate with ElleJanelle. Now that we have all of that information kind of out there to dissect, I think we are on proper footing to really get into the actual question. And the question is this: does funding movement work through corporate settlements and philanthropy from capitalists actually help the work or hinder it? Now, We are also going to go through two different chains of reasoning for the two different sides of this argument. We're going to go down the hindrance chain of reasoning and the help chain of reasoning. Each one of these reasoning chains have 4 claims which are labeled where you should be able to follow and decide if you agree or disagree. If you do disagree, I would appreciate if you present some level of evidence or reasoning or explanation why whatever claim that you are pulling up is not true. My goal is for us to be able to have a deeper conversation about what is or what isn't reality through this process, but this is an experiment. It requires your participation. We need you to share what you truly think. And also what I want to ask you is not just to have a knee-jerk reaction that is a repeat of something that you heard before because you want to have a gotcha moment. I'm asking specifically, try to kind of cage that beast that wants so bad to tell another person that you're smarter than them, or you understand the world better than them, or they're stupid, or they don't understand anything, or they're a sellout, or they're villainized, or whatever. Let's try to really lean more into our minds and listen to the words that are on the screen or on your screen and say, these words I don't agree with. So in order to keep this moving, let's go into the different chains, starting with the hindrance chain. So the first claim under the hindrance chain is that a corporate settlement really purchases the end of public pressure rather than changing the practice that actually causes the harm. I mean, just ending the pressure is enough for a multi-billion-dollar company to write a check. So are we actually achieving the actual goal that we want? Is it a hindrance if you've actually given more peace to the person that we're doing a movement or a action against more so than helping the people? Even if you use this NFL example, I mean, the Players Coalition did announce roughly $89 million over 7 years for social justice causes. And reporting at the time was explicit that the league hoped the arrangement would effectively end the protest movement. But it was about police violence. The demand was attention to state violence, and the deliverable was a grant program. So in some ways, I can understand a person using this claim to say, hey, it sounds good, but it doesn't actually help. The second claim on the hindrance chart is that a campaign's structural demand tends to be abandoned once the money is distributed. So campaigns oftentimes open with structural demands. They want to change a practice. They want to restore a policy. They want to end a contract. But when the campaign closes with a disbursement and the demand is retired by a check, then the record may show that the check cleared, but the practice continued. So with this hindrance chain, I think what's being built up is the idea of, are we actually reaching the goal or are we being pacified? Now, the third claim on the hindrance chain is that organizations funded by settlements develop an interest in producing more settlements rather than resolutions. So this kind of speaks to whether or not getting the settlements instead of the resolution trains the activists in the community to just look for more settlements. Does it motivate or incentivize activists to just find movements to join in order to fill up their coffers? You know, not an accusation against any specific individual activist at all, but it is an incentive structure. And when the income starts to depend on confrontations that conclude in payments, then the incentives migrate from resolution towards transaction. If our goal is to change policy and your goal is to get a check, then we have different goals. Now, the fourth and final claim inside of the hindrance settlement is really a conclusion. Basically, if the funded ecosystem of settlement activists and grant-fed nonprofits is structurally a grift, then extracting in the community's name while the community's material conditions hold constant is a hindrance. Their argument is that if this process is not focused on actually fulfilling the goals of the original movement work in the first place, then yes, it is automatically a hindrance. If we came here for policy change and we left with porcelain plates, then this was a failure. Now, let me know which one of these claims you disagree with if you do not think that these type of corporate settlements or capitalist philanthropists are a hindrance. Let's say you lean the other way. You say, no, it's helpful. I believe that you should be able to pick one of these claims and disarm them. If you aren't able to disarm them, then tell me why you still feel that it is helpful, even though these claims are true. Because I believe there's a lesson there. Now, that was the first chain. This is starting to get really fun. Let's get into the help chain. So, the first claim on the help chain is that money recovered from exploitative corporations is repair. Its origin does not actually disqualify its use. So, basically, if wages are stolen and red lines are drawn, then this is a mechanism, although it's partial and imperfect, that claws some of that back, and it kind of points out the harm. Now, the second claim on this helpful chain is really about resources and how they move in present time. This claim is that communities have present time needs that funded organizations meet right now, and withholding resources until a purer mechanism exists causes present harm. This really speaks to whether or not we need to move immediately, and getting that money, even if it's from a questionable source, allows that to happen. I mean, we do have a lot of funded organizations that do great work. I mean, shout out to Hidden Genius in the Bay, shout out to EOYDC, East Oakland. We want those places to stay open. They take care of the kids. Do we want to say, hey, we'll rather it go broke and close if we have to get money from this specific corporation, this specific philanthropist? And then we go into the third claim. The third claim on the helpful chain is that a structural conflict of interest justifies examination, not necessarily exclusion. And that is true for the activists and for the funders. This argument basically states that wholesale dismissal of funded actors repeats the error that we already rejected in the first question. The first investigation declined to really discard the Black wealthy, but that's because we chose that chain. Again, if you're on the refusal chain and not the force multiplier chain, you're not going to agree with this. But because we chose to go the force multiplier way, we're going to still use it in order to have a foundation for this point. The point is, it's a conflict of interest to throw out the baby with the bathwater. The right thing to do is examine. And this leads us to the fourth claim and also the conclusion. Based on these claims, the funded ecosystem is a legitimate infrastructure. The settlement and donor-funded organizations actually help movement work. Now, we have really investigated the elements of both of these chains. The help chain feels like, hey, I know this may be from a source that we all don't agree with, but we need the money. The hindrance claim is, regardless of us having the money, we have certain goals, and if those goals are not met, then this money can even be in the way. I would like to know exactly what you think about this. How do you see this? Do you agree with the claim? Did you think that you were going to agree with a specific chain, and then when you started to hear the claims, you said, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right? Or did you know in advance, I know which side of the fence I'm on, and when you heard the claims, you were like, yep, and you still stood steadfast in your opinion? I cannot wait to hear about this. I also thought it would be a little helpful to come up with a way where we can kind of analyze each situation separately, because maybe one is a hindrance and one isn't. So let's check these out. 4 ways to check to analyze hindrance or helpful. The first thing is to follow the disbursement. Where did the disbursement go? Who actually got the money? Not just an announcement, but the actual ledger. Was that money transferred? The second one is, did the demand survive the payment? Who governs the money? Who decides where the money goes and when it gets distributed? That's a good thing to check. And last but not least, outcomes over announcements. Sometimes you can hear a great announcement. Hey, we are distributing food all through our city. But then when you actually go and look at the outcomes, you'll find that the targeted audience is not actually the people who are receiving the food. The people who we actually donated to feed are not actually receiving the food. What is the outcome? Not just an announcement that sounds good, that makes us feel warm inside, but the actual impact of that work and that money. So we did it. We fleshed it out. We identified both sides of the argument on whether or not capitalist philanthropists and corporate settlements are helpful or a hindrance to movement work. We identified the different claims that lead people to believe that it's either helpful or either a hindrance. We also identified the different claims that led people to believe that money is an essential element to movement work, or if we just need to pool our resources together as the community in order to get the changes that we want. Those claims were labeled, as well as some common ground claims, as well as some possible ways to analyze whether individual movements are helpful or hindrances. We also identified where should we actually set the line when we're identifying people who have conflict of interest, where we do want to give them more scrutiny and really analyze what their intent is when trying to engage with movement work. Most of these claims had labels. Now it's your chance to step in and become a part of the conversation. Take a moment to go through this video and figure out which elements you agree with and which ones you disagree with, and make yourself heard in the comments by letting me know where you like, ElleJanelle, this part is completely wrong or this part is completely right. And I'll be back doing a live stream, kind of annotating this video and seeing the results that we got. I'm super excited to do more of these type of videos where I kind of lean into different arguments and identify what the claims are so that I can learn more about how people see the world. This is why I actually love philosophy. This happens a lot in philosophy where a person makes a claim and they have to identify how they got there. And it's funny because they kind of roast each other back and forth. Like a person will make a claim and they'll think it sounds so good and it's so amazing and they think they're the smartest person in the world. And then some new philosopher will come like, this doesn't make any sense. This has a fallacy. This has a flaw. It's right here. It's gaping. I can't believe all you other people didn't see it. Did y'all guys just start doing philosophy? So what I'm attempting to do is take some of those tactics and merge them with urban philosophy and see what we can identify about the things that we believe we know or the things that we believe are true. All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in. I'm ElleJanelle. And remember, no matter where you are, there's a lesson there. And I look forward to you elaborating.